I thought I was prepared to defend everything I'd built with sweat and tears, but I never expected the betrayal to come from my own brother. What he said at that dinner made my heart feel like it stopped beating, and the way I responded left him completely shattered. The house I'd scraped and saved for, the sanctuary I'd fought to create, he wanted to claim it as his own, right there at our family table. My parents nodded along like it was already decided, but they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. What happened next would tear our family apart, and honestly, I don't regret a single second of it. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I learned early that life doesn't hand you anything on a silver platter. At 36, I work at Summit Realty Group here in Cleveland, Ohio, but the path to get here was anything but smooth. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While other kids were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, I was stocking shelves at the local grocery store every day after school. By the time I turned 16, I had 2 part-time jobs, one at a coffee shop that opened at 5:30 in the morning, and another at a retail store that kept me busy until 9 at night on weekends. The money wasn't much, but every dollar went toward my college fund because I knew nobody else was going to pay for my education. My parents, Robert and Linda Monroe, had a different philosophy when it came to my younger brother Derek. 2 years my junior, Derek seemed to float through life without a care in the world. Where I had to ask a permission to buy new school supplies, Derek got whatever he wanted without question. New sneakers because his friends had them. No problem. Money for movies and arcade games. Of course, when I needed a calculator for advanced math class, I had to save up for 3 weeks. When Derek wanted a gaming console, it appeared under the Christmas tree that same year. Derek's more sensitive, my mother would say whenever I questioned the obvious favoritism. He needs more support than you do. Rachel, you've always been so independent. Independent. That was their code word for, you can handle everything on your own, so we don't need to worry about you. But what choice did I have if I didn't work? I wouldn't have money for gas, for clothes that weren't secondhand, for any of the small freedoms that make teenage life bearable. Derek, meanwhile, seemed allergic to any form of responsibility. His first job lasted exactly 3 days. He quit because the manager asked him to clean the fryer. His second job ended when he simply stopped showing up. By the time he was 18, he'd been through more positions than I could count: sales associate, restaurant server, delivery driver, retail cashier. Each time, there was an excuse. The boss was unreasonable, the customers were rude, the work was beneath him. And each time Derek failed at something, our parents were right there to catch him. Rent money when he got evicted, Dad wrote the check. Car payments when he defaulted on his loan, Mom covered it. Legal fees when he got into that fender bender and tried to flee the scene. They handled that too, while lecturing me about being more understanding of my brother's struggles. I remember one particular evening when I was 22, fresh out of college and drowning in student loan debt. I'd been eating ramen noodles for 2 weeks straight, trying to stretch my grocery budget until my next paycheck. Derek waltzed into the family dinner that Sunday carrying bags from an expensive electronics store, showing off the new laptop our parents had bought him because he claimed he needed it to find his passion. "What's your passion this week?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "Maybe photography," he said, not even looking up from his shiny new toy. "Or maybe video editing. I haven't decided yet." I thought about the ancient laptop I'd bought used from a classmate 3 years earlier, the one that took 10 minutes to boot up and crashed whenever I tried to run more than one program. I thought about the photography class I'd wanted to take but couldn't afford. I thought about all the dreams I'd shelved because I couldn't justify the expense. "Rachel, don't be like that," my father said, noticing my expression. "Derek's trying to figure out his path. Not everyone moves as fast as you do." Fast I wasn't moving fast, I was moving desperately, like someone trying to outrun a flood. Every day felt like a battle just to keep my head above water, while Derek seemed to be floating along on a life raft my parents kept providing. The pattern continued well into our 20s and 30s. I worked my way up at Summit Realty Group, starting as an assistant and gradually earning more responsibility, more clients, more trust. I learned the business inside and out, building relationships with contractors, mortgage brokers, and clients who became repeat customers because they knew I'd fight for them. Meanwhile, Derek bounced from one failed venture to another, a food truck that never got off the ground, a landscaping business that folded after he forgot to show up for 3 major clients, a brief stint as a freelance handyman that ended when he accidentally flooded a customer's basement. Each failure sent him running back to our parents' house, where he'd stay until he found his next opportunity. And each time, our parents welcomed him with open arms, making excuses about how the economy was tough, how Derek just needed the right break, how I should be more supportive of family. But the breaking point was coming, even if I didn't know it yet. All those years of watching Derek get bailed out while I struggled alone, all those times I bit my tongue when fairness demanded I speak up, it was building towards something. The foundation of resentment was already laid. I just didn't realize how deep those cracks had grown until the day Derek decided that what was mine should be his too. College graduation should have been a celebration. But for me, it felt more like the starting line of a marathon I wasn't sure I could finish. I walked across that stage at Cleveland State University with a business degree in one hand and $43,000 in student loan debt hanging over my head like a storm cloud. While my classmates talked about gap years and traveling Europe, I was already calculating monthly payment schedules and interest rates. My first apartment was a studio in a neighborhood that real estate agents politely called transitional. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television until well past midnight, and the heating system had a personality of its own, either Arctic cold or tropical heat, with no comfortable middle ground. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned, and that made even the cockroaches tolerable. The loan payment started 6 months after graduation, $367 every month for the next 10 years, assuming I never missed a payment and never ran into financial trouble. I worked out the math obsessively after rent, utilities, groceries, and the minimum payment on my loans. I had exactly $43 left each month for everything else: clothes, entertainment, emergencies, car maintenance. All of it had to come from that tiny buffer or from extra shifts I could pick up. I found work at Summit Realty Group as a junior assistant, basically a glorified secretary who answered phones and filed paperwork for $12 an hour. The senior agents treated me like furniture, expecting me to know their schedules better than they did and to fix their mistakes without being asked. I learned to smile when Mrs. Patterson, the top seller, blamed me for appointments she'd forgotten to write down. I perfected the art of staying invisible when Mr. Rodriguez needed someone to blame for his own filing disasters. But I watched everything. During my lunch breaks, I'd study the listing sheets and sales contracts, learning the language of real estate. I memorized neighborhood price ranges and school district ratings. When agents complained about difficult clients, I listened to understand what went wrong and how it could have been handled better. After work, I'd go to the public library and read real estate magazines until closing time, taking notes on market trends and successful sales strategies. The first promotion took 2 years. Customer service coordinator meant I got to interact with clients directly, helping them navigate the paperwork maze of buying or selling a home. The pay bump was modest $15 an hour, but it felt like winning the lottery. I could finally afford to buy groceries without checking my bank balance first. Meanwhile, Derek's career trajectory looked like a roller coaster designed by someone with a vendetta against success. After the food truck disaster, he convinced our parents to co-sign a loan for a landscaping business. He bought a used truck and some equipment, printed business cards with a logo he'd designed himself, and lasted exactly 4 months. The business folded when he forgot to show up for 3 major commercial clients in the same week, including a hotel that had prepaid for seasonal maintenance. "It's harder than it looks," he explained to our parents over Sunday dinner, as if manual labor was some mysterious art form that mere mortals couldn't master. Plus, my back was starting to hurt from all the bending over. Our father nodded sympathetically. Our mother made clucking sounds about how physical work wasn't for everyone. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, thinking about the nights I'd spent hauling boxes of files up 3 flights of stairs at the office, or the weekends I'd spent helping friends move furniture in exchange for $20 in gas money. After landscaping came Derek's brief career as a freelance handyman. This lasted until he accidentally flooded the Johnsons' basement while trying to install a new water heater. The insurance covered most of the damage, but the deductible and lost business killed any momentum he'd built. Then there was the month he tried to become a personal trainer, despite never having worked out consistently in his life. That ended when a client complained to the gym management that Derek spent more time talking about his problems than designing workout routines. Each failure sent Derek back to our childhood bedroom, where our parents welcomed him like a returning war hero instead of a serial quitter. They'd spend hours analyzing what went wrong, never once suggesting that maybe the problem wasn't bad luck or difficult customers or unfair bosses. Maybe the problem was Derek himself. On the other hand, kept climbing. Customer service coordinator became junior sales associate after I successfully handled a complicated sale that 3 senior agents had given up on. The buyers were first-time homeowners with credit issues, and the sellers were going through a messy divorce and couldn't agree on anything. It took me 6 weeks of patient negotiation and creative problem-solving, but I got the deal closed. My commission on that sale was more money than I'd ever seen at once enough to finally replace my dying car with something that didn't require a prayer every time I turned the key. By my late 20s, I'd worked my way up to account manager, handling a portfolio of returning clients and referrals. I was making decent money, enough to move into a real one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where I didn't have to check my car for break-in damage every morning. I was even managing to pay extra on my student loans, chipping away at that mountain of debt faster than the minimum payment schedule required. But success brought its own challenges. The more I achieved, the more my family seemed to expect from me. When Derek's car got repossessed, somehow it became my responsibility to help him find reliable transportation. When our parents needed money for a new roof, they called me first, even though I was still renting and barely building an emergency fund. Every family gathering became an opportunity for someone to mention how lucky I was, as if my 70-hour work weeks and ramen noodle dinners had nothing to do with my progress. Derek's latest venture was driving for a delivery service, which he claimed was perfect because he could set his own schedule. What he actually meant was that he could work when he felt like it and call in sick whenever he wanted to sleep in or hang out with friends. The job lasted 8 months before he got terminated for too many missed shifts and customer complaints about late deliveries. "These apps are rigged against drivers," he announced at our parents' kitchen table, as if he'd uncovered some vast conspiracy. "They expect you to work like a robot." I thought about my own schedule meetings that started at 7 in the morning, client calls that stretched past 8 at night, weekends spent showing houses to families who might not even be serious buyers. Robot-like consistency had built everything I had. But pointing that out would just make me the bad guy again, the sister who didn't understand Derek's artistic temperament and need for creative freedom. What I didn't realize was that Derek had been watching my success just as carefully as I'd been watching his failures. While I saw my achievements as the result of hard work and sacrifice, he was starting to see them as resources that should be shared. After all, wasn't that what family was for? The foundation was already cracking. I just didn't know it yet. At 34, I finally did it. I bought my first house. It wasn't a mansion or even what most people would call impressive a modest 2-story colonial built in 1978, with faded blue siding and a front porch that sagged slightly on the left side. But it had good bones, a decent-sized backyard, and most importantly, it was mine. After years of apartment living, of hearing neighbors' arguments through paper-thin walls and dealing with landlords who treated maintenance requests like personal favors, I was finally holding the keys to my own front door. The closing took place on a rainy Thursday morning in October. I sat in the lawyer's office signing what felt like hundreds of documents, my hand cramping from writing my name over and over, when the real estate attorney finally slid the deed across the table with my name printed as the sole owner. I had to blink back tears. Rachel Monroe, homeowner. It sounded like a foreign language. I spent the first week just walking through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors that needed refinishing. The kitchen was straight out of the 80s, complete with oak cabinets and laminate countertops that had seen better decades. The master bathroom had pink tile that would make a flamingo jealous, but none of that mattered. This was my space to transform, my project to pour love and sweat equity into. Every evening after work, I'd drive to the house with paint samples and measuring tape, planning my renovations down to the smallest detail. The living room would be a soft gray, sophisticated but warm. The kitchen needed new hardware and maybe some subway tile to brighten it up. The small bedroom upstairs would become my home office, where I could work on client files in peace without neighbors stomping around overhead. The backyard was my favorite discovery, hidden behind overgrown shrubs. I found remnants of what had once been a garden. A few stubborn roses had survived years of neglect, and there was enough space for the vegetable garden I'd dreamed about since my apartment days. I spent hours out there on weekends, pulling weeds and imaging rows of tomatoes and herbs. Derek appeared at my front door 3 weeks after I moved in. "Nice place, sis," he said, walking past me without being invited in. He wandered through the downstairs rooms like he was conducting an inspection, running his fingers along the walls and peering into corners. "Needs work, but it's got potential." I followed him, feeling oddly defensive about my home's imperfections. "I'm planning to renovate gradually. The bones are solid." "Yeah, I can see that." He stopped in the living room and turned in a slow circle, taking in the space. "This would be perfect for entertaining. You could fit maybe 30 people in here if you arranged the furniture right." Something in his tone made my skin prickle, but I pushed the feeling aside. He was my brother, and this was the first time he'd shown genuine interest in something I'd accomplished. Maybe this could be a turning point for us. That optimism lasted exactly 2 weeks. Derek started showing up unannounced, always with some excuse. He needed to use my internet because his was down. He wanted to borrow my tool set. He'd been in the neighborhood and thought he'd stop by. Each visit lasted longer than the last, and each time he acted more comfortable, more at home in my space. "You should throw a housewarming party," he suggested one evening, making himself comfortable on my couch while I tried to work on client presentations at the kitchen table. "I could help you plan it. I know people who could cater, get music set up, the whole thing." "I'm not really a party person. Derek, you know that." "Come on, don't be boring. This place is made for entertaining. You can't just hide away like a hermit." But I wasn't hiding. I was savoring. Every quiet evening in my own space felt like a luxury after years of apartment living. I loved reading in the window seat I'd created in the front room. Loved cooking dinner in my kitchen without worrying about disturbing anyone. The silence was golden, not boring. Derek didn't see it that way. He started bringing friends over without asking, treating my living room like his personal hangout spot. I'd come home from showing houses all day to find 3 or 4 people I barely knew drinking beer on my couch, leaving rings on my coffee table and ash from cigarettes on my front porch. "Relax," Derek would say when I expressed discomfort. "They're not hurting anything. This is what houses are for bringing people together." The breaking point came on a Saturday morning when I woke up to find Derek in my kitchen, making breakfast for 2 people I'd never seen before. They'd apparently crashed on my living room floor after what Derek called a small get-together that I'd missed because I was working late with clients. "Morning, sis," Derek called out cheerfully, as if cooking in someone else's kitchen at 7:30 in the morning was perfectly normal. "Want some eggs I made plenty?" I stood in my bathrobe, watching strangers eat food they hadn't bought in a house they didn't own, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't sharing. This wasn't family bonding. This was Derek treating my achievement like community property. "This needs to stop," I said quietly. "What needs to stop?" Derek flipped an egg with casual confidence, spatula handle spinning in his fingers like he was showing off. The random visits, bringing people over without asking, acting like this is your house too." The kitchen went silent except for the sizzling pan. Derek's friends exchanged glances and suddenly found urgent reasons to check their phones. "I'm family," Derek said, his voice taking on the wounded tone he'd perfected in childhood. "I thought you'd want to share your good fortune. Not everyone gets to buy a house, you know." There it was, the guilt trip that had worked on our parents for decades. But this time, standing in my own kitchen wearing my own bathrobe in the house I'd worked 15-hour days to afford, it just made me angry. "You're right," I said. "Not everyone gets to buy a house. People who work consistently, save money, and make sacrifices get to buy houses. People who plan and prioritize and go without things they want because they're focused on things they need." Derek's face flushed red. "Just because I haven't found my path yet doesn't mean—" "Yeah, your path." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't stop them. "Derek, you're 32 years old. You've had more paths than a hiking trail map. At some point, the problem isn't the path, it's the person walking on it." His friends were gathering their things now, mumbling about early appointments and places to be. Derek turned off the burner with more force than necessary, the pan clattering against the stove. "Fine," he said. "I'll remember that my successful sister thinks I'm a failure. Thanks for the family support." He stormed out, his friends trailing behind like embarrassed witnesses to a family meltdown. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and the lingering smell of resentment, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. But as I looked around my home, my sanctuary, my reward for years of grinding work, I realized I didn't regret what I'd said. For the first time in my life, I'd defended what was mine instead of apologizing for having it. I just didn't know that Derek was already planning to take it away from me. The kitchen confrontation should have been the end of it, but Derek had never been one to accept boundaries gracefully. If anything, my attempt to establish limits only seemed to fuel his sense of entitlement. What started as occasional uninvited visits escalated into something that felt dangerously close to an invasion. 3 days after our argument, I came home from a client meeting to find Derek's beat-up Honda Civic in my driveway. Again, I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel and taking deep breaths. Maybe he was here to apologize. Maybe we could have an adult conversation about respect and boundaries. I found him in my backyard, showing 2 of his friends around my garden like he was conducting a real estate tour. "And this whole area back here could be perfect for a fire pit," he was saying, gesturing toward the corner where I'd been planning to plant herbs. "Rachel's not really using the space to its potential." "Derek!" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "What are you doing here?" He turned with that easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. "Hey, sis, just showing Marcus and Jeff the place. They're thinking about buying in this neighborhood, and I told them yours was a good example of what's available." I stared at him, trying to process the audacity. "You're giving real estate tours of my house to people who aren't even serious buyers." "Oh, how do you know they're not serious?" Derek's defensive tone was already creeping in. "Marcus has been saving up, haven't you? Marcus," a thin guy with nervous eyes, nodded weakly. "Yeah, I mean, eventually, when I get my credit sorted out." Your credit sorted out was Derek speak for completely fictional future plans, but pointing that out would just start another fight. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. "I need you all to leave," I said. "Derek, we can talk later, but I'm tired and I have work to do." "Come on, we're not bothering anyone. We're just looking around." "You're bothering me. This is my house, and I'm asking you to leave." The hurt expression Derek wore was Oscar-worthy. "Fine. I guess I'll tell everyone that my own sister kicks family out of her house." After they left, I sat on my front porch and tried to figure out what was happening. This wasn't normal sibling conflict. Derek was treating my home like community property, as if my mortgage payments and legal ownership were just technicalities that didn't really matter. The pattern accelerated over the following weeks. Derek would show up with different friends, each time with a new justification. He needed to borrow my lawnmower. He wanted to show someone my renovation progress. He was in the neighborhood and thought he'd stop by, but the visits were getting longer, more presumptuous, and increasingly frequent. Then came the night I arrived home at 9:15 to find Derek hosting what he generously called a small gathering in my living room. 8 people I didn't know were sprawled across my furniture, playing music loud enough that Mrs. Patterson from next door had probably already started composing her complaint letter. Rachel. Derek jumped up from my couch like he was greeting a guest at his own party. Perfect timing. Come meet everyone. I stood in my own doorway, briefcase still in my hand, and felt something inside me break. Not snap, that would have been sudden and clean. This was more like watching a foundation crack slowly under too much pressure. Everyone needs to leave, I said. Now. Oh, come on, said a girl with purple hair who was sitting in my reading chair. We're not causing any trouble. Derek said you were cool. Derek said wrong. I didn't take my eyes off my brother. This isn't happening anymore. The argument that followed was loud enough that I'm sure the neighbors heard every word. Derek accused me of being selfish, antisocial, and jealous of his social life. I accused him of being disrespectful, entitled, and completely oblivious to the concept of boundaries. His friends shuffled out during the worst of it, mumbling awkward goodbyes and promising to catch up later. When the house was finally empty except for the two of us, Derek played his trump card. I'm calling Mom and Dad, he said. They need to know how you're treating family. Go ahead, I shot back. Tell them how you've been using my house like your personal entertainment center without permission. It's just a house. Rachel, family should come first. This isn't about family. This is about respect, something you've never understood. Derek left that night with promises that this wasn't over, that our parents would straighten me out. I should have taken that threat more seriously. The call came 2 days later while I was reviewing contracts at my office. Well, Rachel, honey. My mother's voice carried that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver a lecture disguised as motherly concern. Derek told us you two had some kind of argument. We did. He's been treating my house like a public venue. Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. You know how Derek is, he's just social. He probably didn't realize he was overstepping. There it was. The automatic assumption that Derek's behavior was innocent and my reaction was excessive. 36 years old, and my mother was still explaining away my brother's actions like he was a confused child instead of a grown man. Mom, he brought strangers into my house without asking, multiple times. Oh, well, maybe you could be a little more understanding. Derek's going through a rough patch right now, and he looks up to you. Having a successful sister with a beautiful home, maybe he just wants to be part of that success. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with my mother expertly reframing Derek's boundary violations as misguided attempts at family bonding. By the end, I was somehow the unreasonable one for not wanting my home turned into a fraternity house. My father's call came that evening. His approach was more direct. Rachel, your mother's upset about this situation with Derek. We raised you kids to look out for each other. I am looking out for him. Dad, I'm trying to teach him that actions have consequences. Sometimes family means making sacrifices. That house of yours is bigger than what one person needs anyway. The words hit me like a physical blow. Bigger than what one person needs. As if my years of work, my careful saving, my sacrifices to afford this place meant nothing because I hadn't chosen to fill it with other people. It's my house, I said quietly. I worked for it. I paid for it. I get to decide who comes and goes. Of course it's your house, sweetheart. Nobody's saying it isn't. We just think maybe you could be more generous with family. Generous. The word followed me through the next several days like an accusation. Was I being stingy? Was I wrong to want my own space to remain mine? Derek's next visit answered that question definitively. He showed up on Saturday afternoon with a key. Where did you get that? I demanded, watching him unlock my front door like he owned the place. Mom gave it to me. The spare you gave them for emergencies. This isn't an emergency. Isn't it? Derek stepped into my hallway and crossed his arms. My own sister won't let me visit my family. Sounds pretty emergency level to me. I realized in that moment that this had moved beyond sibling rivalry. Derek didn't just want access to my house, he wanted control of it. And somehow, incredibly, our parents were helping him take it. The war for my own home had officially begun. The family dinner was supposed to be a peace offering. My mother had called that Tuesday morning, her voice sweet with forced cheerfulness, suggesting we all get together on Sunday to work things out like adults. She'd cook Derek's favorite pot roast, and we could have a nice family conversation about boundaries and understanding. I should have known it was a trap. I arrived at my parents' house at 5:30, carrying a bottle of wine and what I thought was reasonable hope that we could find some middle ground. Derek's car was already in the driveway, and through the kitchen window, I could see him gesturing animatedly while my mother nodded along with everything he said. Rachel. My father opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into one of his bear hugs that used to make everything feel better when I was little. So good to see you, sweetheart. Come on in. The dining room table was set with my mother's good china, the pieces with the tiny blue flowers that only came out for holidays and special occasions. Derek was already seated in what had been my childhood spot, looking relaxed and confident in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Hey, sis," he said, raising his beer bottle in a mock toast. "Thanks for coming." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, but I forced a smile and took the seat across from him. My mother bustled in from the kitchen, carrying the pot roast like it was a crown jewel. "Doesn't this look wonderful?" she said, setting the platter down with a flourish. "Just like when you kids were little." Dinner started pleasantly enough. My father talked about his golf game. My mother asked about work. Derek remained unusually quiet, but I mistook that for maturity rather than strategy. We were halfway through the main course when he struck. "So, I've been thinking," Derek said, cutting his meat with deliberate precision, "about housing situations and family support." I felt the first prickle of alarm. "What do you mean?" Well, you know how Mom and Dad are always talking about the importance of family helping family, and with my current situation being what it is." He paused to take a sip of beer, letting the suspense build. "I think it makes sense for me to move into your place for a while." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me." "Just temporarily," Derek continued, as if my shocked reaction was part of his planned script. "Until I get back on my feet. You've got that extra bedroom upstairs, and it's not like you're using it for anything important." I looked around the table, waiting for someone to object, to point out how insane this suggestion was. Instead, I found my parents nodding thoughtfully, as if Derek had just proposed something perfectly reasonable. "That could work," my mother said slowly. "Rachel, you do have more space than you need for just yourself. And it would be good for Derek to have some stability while he figures out his next move," my father added. "Family should support each other during tough times." I felt like I was drowning in my childhood dining room, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me but were somehow conspiring to give away everything I'd worked for. "No," I said firmly, "absolutely not." Derek's face shifted into the wounded expression that had manipulated our parents for decades. "I'm not asking for charity, Rachel. I'd help with utilities, maybe do some maintenance around the place. It would be good for both of us." "The answer is no. Derek, it's my house." "Our house," my mother corrected gently. "I mean, your house, of course, but family is family. When Derek was going through that rough patch after high school, you stayed here rent-free for almost a year while you saved up for your first apartment." The comparison was so fundamentally unfair that I couldn't speak for a moment. I'd stayed in my childhood bedroom, following house rules, contributing to groceries, and helping with chores. Derek was proposing to move into a house I owned, that I'd worked for years to afford, as if it was some kind of family commune. "That's completely different," I finally managed. "This is my home, my sanctuary, my reward for 15 years of grinding work." "And it's beautiful," Derek said, his voice taking on a manipulative sweetness. "Which is why I thought you'd want to share that beauty with family. Some people might think it's selfish to keep all that space to yourself when your own brother is struggling." There it was. the accusation wrapped in false concern, designed to make me feel guilty for wanting to keep what I'd earned. "Derek," I said, fighting to keep my voice level, "you're not struggling because of bad luck or unfair circumstances. You're struggling because you've never stuck with anything long enough to build a life." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That's not fair," my mother said quickly. "Derek's been trying—" "Trying what?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was past caring about politeness. Trying to find excuses for why nothing is ever his fault, trying to coast on other people's work, trying to turn my house into his personal crash pad. Derek's mask of injured innocence was slipping now, revealing something uglier underneath. "You know what, Rachel, maybe I was wrong to think you'd help family. Maybe success has made you forget where you came from." Where I came from. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor. "I came from the same place you did, Derek. The difference is that I worked to get somewhere else." "Sit down, honey," my father said. "Let's all take a breath and discuss this rationally." But I was done with rational discussion. I was done with being made to feel guilty for having boundaries. I was done with watching my family treat my achievements like community property. "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "Derek is not moving into my house. Not temporarily. Not permanently. Not ever." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at me with naked fury. All pretense of family concern abandoned. My parents looked disappointed and confused, as if I'd just announced I was joining a cult. "Well," Derek said finally, his voice cold as winter rain, "I guess we know where we stand." He pushed back from the table and stood up, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. "Thanks for dinner, Mom, and thanks for showing me who my sister really is." As he headed for the door, he turned back with a smile that made my blood run cold. "Don't worry, Rachel, this isn't over. Family finds a way to work things out, whether you cooperate or not." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows, leaving me standing in my parents' dining room with the horrible certainty that Derek wasn't making an empty threat. He was making a promise. And somehow, I knew that everything I'd built was about to be put to the ultimate test. Derek's parting threat echoed in my mind for 3 sleepless nights. By Wednesday morning, I'd made a decision that would have seemed paranoid a week earlier, but now felt like simple survival. I was going to war, and I needed ammunition. My first call was to Patricia Hendricks, a real estate attorney I'd worked with on several complicated closings. Patricia was the kind of lawyer who could find loopholes in a circle and had a reputation for protecting her clients with the ferocity of a mama bear defending cubs. "Rachel," Patricia's voice was warm but professional when she picked up. "What can I do for you?" "I need to make my house bulletproof," I said without preamble. "Legally speaking." Interesting choice of words. What's the threat? I explained the situation as clinically as possible. Derek's escalating sense of entitlement, my parents' enabling behavior, the dinner table ambush that felt more like a hostile takeover attempt. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding that told me this wasn't her first family property war. "First things first," she said when I finished. "Change your locks immediately. Today, and I mean all of them, front door, back door, any basement or garage entrances. Your parents having a key for emergencies doesn't give your brother squatters' rights." "What about the legal side?" "Oh, we're going to create a paper trail that would make the IRS jealous. I'll draft a formal notice stating that Derek Monroe is not authorized to enter the property at 1247 Maple Street under any circumstances. We'll send copies to him, your parents, and keep several for our files. If he violates that notice, it becomes criminal trespassing instead of a family dispute." By Thursday afternoon, I had new locks and security cameras. The locksmith, a grizzled man named Frank who'd been in business for 30 years, didn't ask why a single woman needed to change every lock in her house, but his knowing look suggested he'd seen this movie before. "Motion-activated cameras are your friends," he said, installing the third deadbolt. "Especially the ones with cloud backup. Hard to argue with video evidence." The cameras went up that weekend, one covering the front porch, one watching the driveway, and one discreetly positioned to monitor the backyard. Each one connected to an app on my phone that would alert me to any movement around my property. But hardware was only half the battle. The real ammunition I needed was information about Derek himself. I'd been protecting my brother's reputation for years, making excuses for his failures or simply staying silent when family friends asked why Derek couldn't seem to hold a job. That protective instinct died the moment he tried to claim my house. If Derek wanted to play dirty, I was going to bury him in his own dirt. The credit report was easier to obtain than I'd expected. A quick online search revealed that Derek's financial situation was even worse than I'd imagined. 3 defaulted credit cards, 2 vehicle repossessions, a defaulted student loan that he'd apparently forgotten about, and a judgment from a former landlord for unpaid rent and property damage. His credit score was lower than the temperature in January. Social media provided the next layer of evidence. Derek's Facebook and Instagram accounts were treasure troves of irresponsibility. Photos of expensive dinners at restaurants posted the same week he'd asked our parents for rent money. Screenshots of him bragging about calling in sick to work so he could go to a baseball game. Videos of parties at various apartments where he'd clearly been drinking and making noise well past reasonable hours. But the real goldmine came from his ex-girlfriend Miranda, who'd apparently been waiting years for someone to ask about Derek's true character. "Are you kidding me?" Miranda's voice was sharp with bitter amusement when I called her. "Derek Monroe is trying to move into your house, girl. Run! Run fast and run far." Miranda had dated Derek for 8 months, during which time he'd moved into her apartment, maxed out her credit cards, and disappeared one night with her laptop and jewelry. She'd filed a police report, but Derek had convinced their mutual friends that it was all a misunderstanding, that Miranda was unstable and vindictive. "I still have the text messages," Miranda said, "where he promised to pay me back and then blocked my number, and the photos of him wearing my grandmother's necklace at some party. Your brother isn't just irresponsible, Rachel. He's a predator who targets people who care about him." I asked Miranda to document everything and send it to Patricia. If this situation escalated to legal action, we'd need every piece of evidence we could gather. The most damaging information came from Derek's former employers. Professional discretion prevented most of them from saying much, but off-the-record conversations painted a picture of someone who viewed employment as an optional social activity. The restaurant manager who'd fired him for stealing tips. The delivery company supervisor who'd terminated him for falsifying delivery confirmations. The construction foreman who'd caught him sleeping in a work truck during business hours. Patricia was impressed with my thoroughness when I delivered the compiled evidence to her office. "This is either the work of a very paranoid person or someone who knows exactly what they're dealing with," she said, flipping through the folders I'd prepared. "Both," I admitted. "My brother has spent 34 years perfecting the art of making his problems everyone else's responsibility. I'm done being his safety net." "Good, because based on this documentation, Derek Monroe wouldn't qualify for supervised housing at a halfway house, much less moving into a property he doesn't own." The final piece of my preparation was the hardest, accepting that this fight would likely destroy my relationship with my parents. They'd spent decades enabling Derek's behavior, and asking them to suddenly see him clearly was probably hopeless. But I needed to try one more time. I called my mother on Sunday evening, choosing my words carefully. "Mom, I want you to understand something. Derek isn't going through a rough patch. He's a 34-year-old man who has never taken responsibility for his own life. The house situation isn't about family support. It's about him trying to take something that doesn't belong to him." "Rachel, honey, I think you're being too harsh. Derek just needs—" "Mom, Derek has stolen from his ex-girlfriend. He's been fired from jobs for sleeping on the clock and taking money that wasn't his. He has judgments against him for unpaid rent and destroyed property. This isn't about helping family. This is about protecting myself from someone who sees everything I own as his backup plan." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "I don't believe that," my mother finally said. "Derek has his struggles. But he's not a thief. Then ask him about Miranda's necklace. Ask him about the tips he took from the restaurant. Ask him why he's been fired from 7 jobs in 3 years. I won't listen to you attack your brother like this. When she hung up, I sat in my living room, in my house, that I'd earned with my own work, and felt something settle into place. The last of my guilt evaporated, replaced by cold, clear determination. Derek wanted a war fine, but he'd picked the wrong target, because while he'd been perfecting the art of failure, I'd been learning how to fight. And I was about to show him exactly what that looked like. The ambush came disguised as another family dinner invitation. This time, my mother's voice carried a tone of forced optimism that immediately put me on high alert. Derek has something exciting to share, she said over the phone Tuesday morning. He's really turned things around. Rachel, I think you'll be proud of him. I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation, but instead I agreed to come. Let them play their hand. I was ready for whatever game they thought they were running. I arrived at my parents' house Saturday evening armed with 2 manila folders and a phone fully charged for recording. The scene was eerily similar to the previous dinner. Same good china, same seating arrangement, same expectant energy crackling around the table. But this time, Derek's confidence had an almost manic quality that made my skin crawl. Rachel. Derek jumped up to hug me, his enthusiasm so over the top that it felt like a performance. I'm so glad you came. Wait until you hear my news. We made it through exactly 12 minutes of small talk before Derek launched into his prepared presentation. So, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation, he began, cutting his pork chop with theatrical precision. About responsibility, about family, about making smart decisions. I waited, fork poised halfway to my mouth. And I've decided to make some major life changes, starting with my living situation. Derek's smile was wide enough to sell toothpaste. I've found the perfect place to get my life together. Stable environment, good neighborhood, plenty of space to focus on building my future. That's wonderful, I said carefully. Where? Your house? The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Derek continued talking as if he'd just announced a perfectly normal career change. I know what you're thinking, we discussed this before, but I've really thought it through this time. I'm not talking about crashing on your couch or being a burden. I'm talking about a proper living arrangement. I could take over the upstairs bedroom, help with maintenance, even contribute to the mortgage payments when I get back on my feet. I set down my fork with deliberate calm. Derek, the answer hasn't changed since last time. It's still no. But that's the thing. Derek's voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a slow child. I've already started the transition. I've been storing some of my stuff in Mom and Dad's garage, but I cleared out my current place yesterday. The move-in is basically a done deal. The audacity was breathtaking. Derek had apparently decided that my refusal was just an opening negotiation position, something to be bulldozed through with enough confidence and family pressure. The move-in to where I asked. To your place. Our place. Really. I mean, it's big enough for both of us. And... Stop! I stood up, pulling out the first manila folder. Before you go any further with this fantasy, there are some things everyone at this table needs to see. Derek's confident expression flickered for the first time. Rachel, what are you doing? I'm showing our parents who you really are. I opened the folder and began placing documents on the table like evidence in a courtroom. Credit report showing 3 defaulted cards and 2 vehicle repossessions. Police report from Miranda Patterson documenting theft of personal property. Text message screenshots where you admit to taking money from her accounts. My mother's face went pale. Rachel, where did you get these? Employment records from 7 different jobs, showing termination for cause in every single case. Theft, sleeping on duty, abandoning shifts, falsifying reports. I laid out each piece of evidence with surgical precision. Bank statements showing overdraft fees that total more than most people's monthly rent. This is private information, Derek sputtered, his composure completely shattered. You had no right. I had every right to protect myself. I pulled out the second folder. Legal documentation establishing that Derek Monroe is not authorized to enter my property under any circumstances. Security camera footage from last week showing him trying to enter through my back door with what appears to be a crowbar. The silence in the room was deafening. My father stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. My mother's hands were shaking. "Derek," she whispered, "is this true?" "It's taken out of context," Derek said desperately. "Rachel's making me sound like some kind of criminal. I was just trying to—" "Steal from your ex-girlfriend," I interrupted. "Sleep on the job, break into my house." "I wasn't breaking in, I was just checking to see if you were home. I thought maybe we could talk." "With a crowbar." Derek's face flushed red with fury and embarrassment. The charming, misunderstood brother act was completely gone now, replaced by something ugly and desperate. "You know what," he snarled. "Fine. You want to play this game, I don't need your permission to live in that house. Family property is family property, and I've got just as much right to it as you do." This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, which had been recording the entire conversation. "Actually, Derek, you don't have any rights to my property. Zero. None. And threatening to unlawfully enter my house is a crime." I held up the phone so everyone could see the recording app, which I now have documented evidence of. The color drained from Derek's face. "You recorded this?" "I recorded everything. Your threats. Your admission that you've already made moving plans. Your claim that you have rights to property you don't own." I looked directly at my parents. "I also have documentation of every time you've enabled this behavior. Every time you've pressured me to accommodate Derek's irresponsibility." My mother burst into tears. My father sat frozen, staring at the evidence spread across his dining room table like the wreckage of everything he thought he knew about his son. Derek stood up so violently that his chair toppled backward. "You think you're so smart?" he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You think your little investigation makes you untouchable? I'll find a way into that house. Rachel, I'll find a way to take everything you think you've earned." I stood up to face him, no longer the accommodating big sister who'd spent decades making excuses for his failures. "No, Derek, you won't." My voice was steady, cold, and completely without mercy. "Because from this moment forward, you're done using this family as your personal ATM. You're done treating other people's achievements like your inheritance. And you're done pretending that your failures are everyone else's responsibility." I gathered up my evidence and headed for the door, pausing only long enough to deliver the final blow. "This is my house, built with my work, paid for with my money, protected by my lawyers, and starting now, it's off limits to parasites." As I walked out of my childhood home for what I suspected would be the last time, I heard Derek screaming behind me about family loyalty and ungrateful sisters, but his words bounced off me like rain off a roof. The war was over, and for the first time in my life, I had won. The final confrontation came exactly 1 week later, and it was even more pathetic than I'd expected. Derek showed up at my front door at 11:45 on a Tuesday night, drunk and accompanied by 2 equally intoxicated friends who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. My security cameras caught every stumbling step as they approached my porch, and the motion-activated lights illuminated their faces with perfect clarity. "Rachel." Derek pounded on my door hard enough to wake the entire neighborhood. "Open up, we need to talk." I stayed in my bedroom, watching the live camera feed on my phone while speed-dialing Patricia Hendricks. She answered on the second ring, sounding remarkably alert for someone I'd just woken up. "It's happening," I said simply. "Are you safe? Are you recording?" "Yes to both. He's got 2 friends with him. They're all drunk, and they're making enough noise to violate 3 different city ordinances." "Perfect. Let him dig his own grave. I'm calling the police now." Derek's performance was spectacular in its complete lack of self-awareness. He alternated between pounding on the door and shouting through my living room window, delivering a rambling monologue about family loyalty and selfish sisters while his friends shifted nervously behind him. "This is my house, too," he screamed, his words slurring together. "My parents helped raise the sister who bought it that makes it family property." I almost laughed at the twisted logic, but I was too busy documenting everything for the inevitable legal proceedings. The police arrived 12 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with officers who looked like they'd handled plenty of domestic disputes. Derek's bravado evaporated the moment he saw the flashing lights, but it was too late for damage control. "Sir, we need you to step away from the door," the first officer said calmly. "This is family business," Derek protested, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. "I'm just trying to talk to my sister." At midnight, by pounding on her door and shouting threats. "They weren't threats. I was just explaining that." "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop talking and listen carefully." I watched from my bedroom window as the officers took statements from Derek and his friends, then approached my front door. I met them with copies of Patricia's legal documentation, the restraining order we'd filed preemptively, and the complete security footage from the evening's events. "Ma'am, this is one of the most well-documented harassment cases I've ever seen," the older officer said, flipping through my evidence folders. "Your brother's looking at criminal trespassing, disturbing the peace, and violation of a restraining order." Derek spent the night in jail. His friends abandoned him the moment the handcuffs came out, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. I slept better than I had in months, knowing that my home was finally secure. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Derek pled guilty to avoid additional charges, accepting a deal that included mandatory anger management classes and a permanent no-contact order. My parents called once, my mother crying and asking how things had gotten so bad. I explained, one final time, that Derek's problems weren't tragedies that had happened to him. They were consequences of choices he'd made consistently for years. "We just wanted our family to stay together," she sobbed. "Mom, enabling someone's destructive behavior isn't keeping the family together. It's watching them destroy everyone around them while pretending that's love." That was the last conversation we had. Sometimes love means setting boundaries that hurt, and sometimes protecting yourself requires walking away from people who refuse to see the truth. 6 months later, I received word through mutual friends that Derek had moved to Florida, where he was apparently trying to restart his life with a new set of people who didn't know his history. I hoped he'd learned something from our confrontation, but I didn't spend much time wondering. His choices were no longer my responsibility. My house became exactly what I'd always dreamed it would be, a sanctuary where I could read in peace, garden without interruption, and invite people over when I chose to, not when someone decided they were entitled to my space. The security cameras stayed up, but more as a reminder than a necessity. I'd learned to defend what was mine. Patricia framed the final court documents and sent them to me with a note. "Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Congratulations on winning your war." But the real victory wasn't the legal documents or Derek's criminal record. It was the moment I stopped apologizing for having boundaries, stopped feeling guilty for protecting what I'd earned, and stopped allowing other people's dysfunction to become my emergency. I kept the old keys on my kitchen counter for a while, the ones Derek had tried to use to claim ownership of my life. Eventually, I threw them away. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. Standing in my living room that night, surrounded by the peace I'd fought so hard to protect, I finally understood something that had taken me 36 years to learn. Family isn't about blood or obligation or sacrificing yourself for people who refuse to grow up. Family is about mutual respect, boundaries that everyone honors, and love that doesn't come with the price tag of your own dignity. Derek had wanted to take my house, but in the end, he'd given me something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to protect what I'd built, no matter who tried to tear it down. The house was mine. The victory was mine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for either one. Thank you for listening to this story of family boundaries and the courage it takes to protect what you've earned. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what you think about Rachel's journey. Drop a comment below to let me know your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more real-life tales of standing up for yourself when it matters most. Your support and engagement mean everything, and I'd love to continue this conversation with you.